They chained a starving dragon for 90 days, then a human family changed the galaxy forever. Before we start the story, tell us. Welcome to DracoWar. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. We read every one. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. Mara Voss noticed the smell first. She was 61 years old, a retired veterinary surgeon from rural Nebraska, and she had spent 40 years learning that animals in pain smelled a specific way, sour and sharp, like copper left in standing water. She had learned to follow that smell the way other people followed smoke. She followed it now, down the slope behind her property, past the broken fence her late husband Bernard had always meant to fix, and into the gully where the creek ran brown and fast after heavy rain. What she found stopped her cold. It was roughly the size of a draft horse, though it weighed far less. She could see that immediately. Its ribs pressed against skin that should have been scaled but had gone pale and papery from prolonged malnutrition. Its wings, folded tight against its body, were torn at the membranes in at least 4 places. One rear leg was shackled to a steel post driven deep into the creek bank, the chain thick as a man's wrist and crusted with something dark that was not rust. It was a dragon. Not the dragons of human mythology, not the fire-breathing serpents of old stories. This was something older and more alien. A Vishari, one of the sentient reptilian species from the Keth system, roughly 40 light-years from Earth. Mara knew what it was because her son Daniel worked for the Galactic Integration Bureau in Omaha, and he had shown her pictures once 2 years ago, when the Bureau first opened its Nebraska field office. The Vishari were not common on Earth. They were proud, intelligent, politically complicated, caught between 2 galactic factions that had been at war for longer than human civilization had existed. They were not supposed to be here in rural Nebraska, chained in a flooding creek gully, starving to death. The creature's eyes opened. They were amber, ringed with gold, and despite everything, the pain, the starvation, the rain, those eyes were alert. Watching her. Assessing. Mara had spent 40 years reading animals. She understood the difference between aggression and desperation. What she saw in those eyes was neither. It was something she recognized from her years in the surgical ward, from the faces of creatures who had been suffering so long they had stopped expecting anyone to help. It was surrender. She took 1 step forward. The dragon flinched, a full-body recoil that must have sent fire through its injured leg, because it made a sound low in its chest, a resonant vibration that Mara felt in her back teeth. She stopped, crouched down in the mud, put her hands flat on the ground where it could see them. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said. She said it the same way she had said it 10,000 times before, to dogs, to horses, to a mountain lion that had wandered into her clinic one winter with a leg trap still attached. Slow. Even. Not soft exactly, but honest. "I need you to let me look at you. Can you do that?" The amber eyes blinked. She took that as a yes. Her name was Mara Ellen Voss, née Kowalski, born November 3, 1963, in a farmhouse 12 miles from where she currently crouched in the mud. She had never left Nebraska except for veterinary school in Kansas City and 1 trip to Washington, D.C. with Bernard in 1987 that neither of them had particularly enjoyed. She had raised 2 children in a house that always needed one more repair than they could afford. She had buried her husband 4 years ago. She had kept working because stopping felt like a second kind of dying. She was not a politician. She was not a soldier. She was not a diplomat or a scientist or a person of any galactic consequence. She was a woman who understood animals, and she had found one that needed help. That was enough. The shackle was Keth forged, she learned that later. Military-grade titanium alloy bonded with a magnetic lock that required a biometric command signal to release. She did not know any of that standing in the rain. What she knew was that her bolt cutters would not touch it, her saw would not scratch it, and the post it was anchored to went 4 feet into solid creek bank. She called Daniel. He answered on the 3rd ring, still half asleep despite it being 9 in the morning, and she described what she was looking at in precise clinical terms the way she always described things, and when she finished there was a silence on the line that lasted long enough that she checked to make sure the call had not dropped. "Mom," Daniel finally said. "Do not touch that chain." "I already touched it." "Do not touch the dragon." "Daniel." "Mom?" "I've already touched the dragon." Another silence. "I'm calling the Bureau," he said. "Do not do anything else. I mean it. This is not a sick calf. This is a galactic incident." She looked at the Vishari. It had not moved. Its eyes had not left her face. "It's a living creature," she said. "In pain. In the rain. That's what it is." She hung up. She went back to the house. She came back with a tarpaulin, 2 wool blankets she no longer needed, a bucket of warm water, and the remains of a deer carcass from her neighbor Holmes' recent hunt that she had been meaning to dispose of. She did not know if Vishari ate deer. She put it down 10 feet away in the creature's sight line and waited. It took 40 minutes. Then, slowly, painfully, the dragon stretched its neck the distance the chain allowed and ate. Mara sat in the rain and watched and felt something settle in her chest that she had not felt since Bernard died. A sense of being exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly the thing she was meant to do. The Bureau arrived at dusk. 3 black vehicles, 6 agents in gray coats, and her son Daniel, who hugged her tightly and then held her at arm's length and looked at her the way he had been looking at her since his father died, like she was something fragile that kept refusing to behave like something fragile. The lead agent's name was Coordinator Hess. She was 40, sharp-eyed, and she looked at the dragon the way bureaucrats always look at problems, like something to be processed and contained. "This is a Vishari prisoner of war," Hess said. "Designation unknown. It was being transported by Keth Dominion forces when their ship experienced atmospheric failure 3 months ago. The prisoner escaped the wreckage and was subsequently recaptured by a Dominion recovery team and resecured on site pending extraction." "Pending extraction," Mara repeated. "They're coming for it in 72 hours. Standard treaty protocol. It's been chained here for 3 months. That's consistent with the Dominion's timeline, yes. In a flood gully. Without food." Hess's expression did not change. "Mrs. Voss, I understand this is distressing. But this is a Keth Dominion military matter. Under the Integration Accords of 2031, we have no authority to—" "What did it do?" Mara asked. "Why is it a prisoner?" Hess paused. "That information is classified." Mara looked at the dragon. The dragon looked back. "Then I'm not moving," she said. "This is my property. That creature is on my property. And until someone tells me what crime it committed and shows me documentation that this treatment is lawful under any code your bureau recognizes, no one is taking it anywhere." Daniel put his face in his hands. Hess stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached for her communications device. The first shot of a war that would reshape the galaxy had not been fired with a weapon. It had been fired by a 61-year-old veterinarian from Nebraska who sat down in the mud and refused to move. The Bureau set up portable lighting rigs around the gully. By full dark, the creek bank looked like a crime scene, which Mara supposed it was, only nobody seemed certain yet whose crime it was. Daniel brought her coffee from the truck. She accepted it without looking at him because she knew the expression on his face and she did not have the patience for it right now. "You know they can override property rights in a galactic jurisdiction matter," he said quietly. "They haven't. They're considering it. Let them consider it." He crouched beside her in the mud. He was 42 years old and had her late husband's jaw and her own stubborn eyes, and she had never been more grateful for that stubbornness than she was right now. "Mom, what is your actual plan here?" She looked at the dragon. It had eaten all of the deer. Its breathing was steadier than it had been 3 hours ago, though the shackled leg was still badly swollen and she could see signs of early infection even from a distance. "My plan is to find out what's actually happening. Not the treaty language. Not the jurisdiction. What actually happened to this animal? It's not an animal. It's a living being in pain. Same category. The Vishari are a spacefaring civilization. They have interstellar politics and military hierarchies and right now one of them is chained to a post in my creek with an infected leg and hasn't had clean water in God knows how long." She finally looked at her son. "Would you walk away?" He was quiet for a moment. "No," he admitted. "But I also don't have galactic treaty obligations." "Neither do I." Coordinator Hess returned at 2,200 hours with a tablet and a different expression. Less bureaucratic, more careful. She sat on the camp stool one of her agents brought and she looked at Mara the way people look at someone they've reassessed. "I've been authorized to share some information," Hess said. "Off the record." "There's no record," Mara said. "There's just us and the rain." Hess glanced at the dragon then back. "The Vishari's name is Soreth. Was a commander in the Vishari Sovereign Fleet. Roughly equivalent to what we'd call a brigadier general." She paused. 18 months ago, the Keth Dominion launched an offensive against a Vishari colony world called Ethon 7. Population of approximately 3 million. Mostly civilians. Soreth was the fleet commander assigned to defend it. Mara waited. "The Keth forces used a weapon we don't have good intelligence on. A signal disruptor that collapsed Vishari communications across the entire system. Soreth's fleet was blind. He couldn't coordinate, couldn't receive orders, couldn't confirm positions." Hess's voice stayed level, professional, but something moved behind her eyes. He made a decision to withdraw the fleet rather than fight blind and lose every ship. The colony was taken. 200,000 civilians were killed in the initial occupation. The rain tapped against the tarpaulin. The Vishari Sovereign Command court-martialed him, Hess continued. Convicted him of dereliction. The Keth Dominion claimed him as a prisoner of war under a provision that, frankly, most legal scholars think is being applied selectively. She stopped. He has been in Keth custody for 13 months. Transferred 6 times. This gully was supposed to be a temporary holding site for 36 hours before extraction to a Dominion prison facility. 36 hours became 3 months, Mara said. The extraction ship was damaged in a separate engagement. Replacements kept being reassigned. He became, Hess paused, choosing her word carefully, administrative. A file that kept getting moved to the bottom of the queue. Mara was quiet for a long time. She thought about what it meant to make an impossible decision in the dark. To choose the option that saved more lives and be condemned for it anyway. To be abandoned not out of cruelty but out of bureaucratic indifference, which was its own kind of cruelty, slower and colder and somehow worse. She thought about Bernard in the hospital, near the end, when the insurance had started fighting the treatment costs and she had spent 3 weeks on the phone navigating systems designed to exhaust people into giving up. He made the right call, she said. It was not a question. Hess looked at her steadily. I can't say that officially. You just did. Pause. Then, quietly, the Keth Dominion has significant economic leverage over several member species of the Integration Council. Challenging their prisoner treatment protocols would create diplomatic complications that the Council has, so far, chosen to avoid. So everyone knows this is wrong and nobody's doing anything. Mrs. Voss. That's a yes. She stood up. Her knees ached from the cold and the mud. She didn't care. How long until the extraction ship arrives? 71 hours now. Then I have 71 hours. She looked at Hess directly. What would it take, legally, specifically, to file a contested custody claim under integration law? Not to win it. Just to file it. Just to put it on record and force a formal review. Hess blinked. For the first time since she'd arrived, Coordinator Hess looked genuinely uncertain. That process has never been initiated by a private citizen. The legal framework exists in theory, but does it exist? A long pause. Yes, Hess said carefully. It exists. Then help me find it. What happened next was not dramatic. It was the opposite of dramatic. It was paperwork and phone calls and a laptop balanced on the tailgate of a bureau truck while rain drummed the roof and Daniel ordered pizza at midnight because nobody had eaten and Mara dictated in Hess's junior agent, a young man named Prakash who turned out to have a law degree from Georgetown, typed as fast as she could speak. The contested custodial review filing, Form ICB 7714, last used in 2034 by a Threshi diplomat on behalf of his own government, required 3 things. A certified witness to the prisoner's condition, a statement of humanitarian concern filed by a legal resident of an integration signatory world, and a formal request for independent medical evaluation. Mara was a certified veterinary surgeon. She was a legal resident of Earth, which had been an integration signatory since 2029. And she could evaluate Soratha's physical condition with professional credentials that even treaty law would have difficulty dismissing. At 3:47 in the morning, Prakash submitted the filing. At 3:52, the Integration Council's automated acknowledgement system sent a confirmation. At 3:53, a Keth Dominion diplomatic station 40 light-years away received an alert flag on a file they had considered closed. Daniel handed his mother another cup of coffee and stared at the confirmation number on the screen. He said and stopped. I just filed paperwork, Mara said. You just filed paperwork that triggers a mandatory 72-hour hold on any prisoner extraction during formal review. Which means the ship can't take him while the review is pending. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup. I bought us time. In the gully, Sorath the dragon lay still under the tarpaulin. His breathing had steadied through the night. His amber eyes were closed. But earlier, Mara had seen it just once. He had turned his head toward the light from the bureau trucks, and toward the sound of humans talking and typing and fighting on his behalf, and he had made that low resonant sound again. This time it had not sounded like pain. Dawn came gray and cold. The creek was still running fast. Mara had slept 2 hours in the back seat of Daniel's truck, wrapped in her coat, and woken before first light with the particular clarity that comes from sleeping badly but knowing you have to keep moving. She brought fresh water down to the gully, 2 buckets and a second armful of food, this time a mix of the remaining deer, some raw fish from her freezer, and a large portion of the beef liver she had originally bought for her neighbor's sick retriever. She placed them at the edge of Soritha's reach and stepped back. He was watching her. He had been watching her, she suspected, since before she came within his line of sight. He tracked her movements with those amber eyes with the precision of something that had survived by observing everything. She sat down on the same muddy bank where she had sat the night before. "I don't know if you understand me," she said. "I don't know what you can hear or process or if the translation technology even works at this range without a relay. But I'm going to talk anyway because that's what I do with patience." Sorith did not move. "You made the right call," she said. "At Ethon 7. I want you to know that I believe that." A long pause. Rain in the leaves above. The creek moving fast. Then Sorith turned his head very slowly and placed his chin flat on the ground in a deliberate, controlled motion. It was not a collapse. It was something intentional. His eyes remained on her face, steady and clear. She didn't know what it meant, but she felt it mean something. Prakash came down to the gully at 0800 with his tablet and a look of carefully managed excitement. "The filing triggered more than the hold," he said, crouching beside her and turning the screen so she could read it. "There's a provision in the ICB review process that requires the filing party to have access to the prisoner for the purpose of conducting their evaluation. Full access. Unsupervised if requested." Mara looked at him. "Which means we can get the chain off." "Not permanently. But for the evaluation period, yes. The chain constitutes a medical variable. You can argue, and I've already drafted the argument, that you cannot conduct a complete assessment of his physical condition or the extent of his injuries while he remains restrained. The chain has to come off." Prakash paused. "The Keth Dominion's diplomatic team has already filed an objection. But the hold is automatic. They can't override it for 72 hours. "What's the actual downside?" Daniel asked from behind them. He had his own coffee and the look of a man who had also slept badly and was also refusing to stop. "If the Keth Dominion decides this is more than a bureaucratic nuisance, if they escalate it diplomatically, the Council could get pressure to dismiss the review. The hold gets lifted early. They come for him anyway." Prakash looked at Mara. "But that would take time. And it would be public. A formal escalation creates a record. A record that a private citizen filed a successful challenge to a Dominion prisoner extraction," Mara said slowly. "Yes. And that the Dominion then escalated against that citizen to suppress it." Prakash was quiet for a moment. "I hadn't framed it that way." "I have." She stood up. "Get me a translator relay. Whatever the Bureau has on site. And get me the chain removal authorization in writing." The translator relay was a handheld unit about the size and shape of an old transistor radio, gray with blue indicator lights, calibrated for Vishari primary dialect. Hess handed it to Mara with the air of someone who had stopped predicting outcomes and committed to watching what happened next. The chain came off at 1100 hours. It required a Bureau-issued override device and a Keth release authorization that Prakash had spent 4 hours extracting from the automated review system. A process he compared, with the exhausted humor of someone who had been awake for 30 hours, to trying to get a refund from an airline that no longer existed. When the magnetic lock disengaged, the chain fell away from Soritha's leg with a sound like a single heavy bell. He did not move for a long time. Then, gradually he extended the injured leg, the first time he had been able to fully straighten it in God knows how long, and a sound came from deep in his chest, low and continuous, that the translator relay rendered as a single word. "Finally." Mara crouched in front of him, relay in hand, medical kit open beside her, and looked at him steadily. "I need to examine your leg. Your whole body really. I'm a surgeon. I know this isn't the same as your medical technology, but I know what infection looks like and I know how to reduce inflammation and I know how to keep a wound from getting worse while we figure out what happens next." She paused. "May I?" The relay hummed. Soritha's amber eyes moved from her face to the medical kit to her hands and back to her face. Then he spoke. The translator relay processed for 3 seconds. "You smell of healing things. You have fed me twice. You sat in the rain." "Yes," she said. "What?" She had been asked this question in various forms across 40 years of practice. By owners who didn't understand why she kept working on animals that couldn't be saved. By colleagues who thought she spent too much time on cases that weren't worth the cost. By her own children when they were young and she came home late and smelling of antiseptic and she tried to explain what it meant to have the ability to help and to use it. She gave the same answer she always gave. "Because you needed it," she said. "And I could." A long silence. Sorith lowered his head and held still. She began the examination. What she found was thorough and grim and survivable. That last part was the one she held onto. The shackle had caused deep tissue damage to the lower leg with significant infection that had tracked upward into the muscle. His wing membranes would heal with time but needed to be cleaned and closed in at least 3 places. He was dangerously underweight. She estimated he had lost between 20 and 30% of his body mass. His eyes showed signs of dehydration. His temperature, measured by the Bureau's handheld bioscanner that Hess quietly lent her without comment, ran low. She worked steadily. She talked while she worked, the way she always did, explaining what she was doing and why, not because he necessarily needed the explanation but because she had learned that the sound of a calm voice doing calm things was its own form of medicine. Soreth held still throughout. He watched her with those amber eyes, and occasionally the translator relay would pick up something she didn't ask for, not words exactly, more like responses, fragments. That is worse than I understood. The cold made it harder to feel. You are faster than I expected. Toward the end, as she was finishing the wound closures on his wing, he spoke a full sentence. The filing you made. I heard the humans talking about it last night. Explain what it means. She sat back on her heels. It means you can't be taken for at least 72 hours. Maybe longer, depending on how the review proceeds. And after? She was quiet for a moment. We're working on that. What? It was the same question. Different weight. Because what happened to you was wrong, she said. The withdrawal. The court-martial. The chain. All of it. And when something is wrong, you don't look away from it because it's complicated or because someone tells you the jurisdiction isn't yours. You don't look away. Soreth was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, the relay took longer than usual. The phrase it produced seemed to strain against the limits of direct translation. In Vishari there is a concept. No exact human word. It means, the ones who witness suffering and refuse to become accustomed to it. We consider them the most dangerous kind of person. Mara looked at him. Dangerous how? Because they never stop. The Keth Dominion's response came at 1,600 hours, and it was not what anyone expected. It was not a formal diplomatic escalation. It was not a legal counterfiling. It was a ship. Prakash saw it first on the Bureau's atmospheric monitoring feed, a Keth military courier vessel, small and fast, descending through cloud cover at an angle that was technically legal and practically threatening. It landed in Mara's north field, flattening a section of winter wheat she had not gotten around to clearing, and 4 Keth soldiers stepped out in full environmental gear followed by a figure in diplomatic dress whose translator badge identified him as Envoy-class Delegate Thon. He walked to the gully's edge and looked down at Mara. She looked up at him. Mrs. Voss, Thon said. His translator rendered his speech in clean flat English. You have created a significant administrative difficulty. I filed paperwork, she said. You initiated a process that is drawing attention to a matter the Dominion considers resolved. It's not resolved. He's still here. She gestured at Soreth. With an infected leg and 3 months of documented neglect. Thon's expression was unreadable. He was tall and pale with a face structured around sharp geometric angles. She had never seen a Keth in person before, and she filed this information the same way she filed everything. Clinically, completely, without fear. The Dominion is prepared to offer certain concessions if the review filing is withdrawn. What concessions? Soreth's prison facility will be upgraded. His medical needs will be addressed. He will be treated according to Dominion standard protocols. Which are what exactly? Pause. Standard for military prisoners. I want the specific standards in writing. I want independent verification access. I want a named party held responsible for compliance. She paused. And I want him examined by an Integration Council medical team before he goes anywhere. Thon's eyes moved to Soreth, then back to her. You are not a diplomat. No, she agreed. I'm not. Which means I'm not playing the game the way you expect it to be played. What followed was 3 hours of the most unusual negotiation that had ever taken place in a Nebraska Creek gully. Daniel handled the legal documentation with Prakash. Hess served as the Bureau's official witness, which gave the conversation treaty-level standing it would not otherwise have had. Mara sat across from Envoy Thon on folding camp chairs that one of Hess's agents had brought from the truck, and she negotiated with the same patient precision she had used for 40 years when discussing difficult prognosis with the people who loved her patients. She had learned something over those 40 years. That clarity was a form of power. Not aggression, not volume, not dominance. Just the willingness to say the exact thing clearly and wait without flinching for the response. She told Thon what she had found when she examined Soreth. She described the infection, the wound progression, the muscle tracking, the weight loss, the wing damage in precise clinical terms. She made him understand that she was not making an emotional argument. She was making a medical and legal record. She told him that the record now existed in Integration Council archives. That it had a timestamp. That it had her professional credentials attached to it. That it would remain there whether or not Soreth was taken in the next hour. Then she made him an offer. The Dominion doesn't want a public record of this, she said. Not because you're embarrassed by the conditions. I don't think embarrassment is part of how you calculate these things. But because a successful citizen review filing sets a precedent. If I can do it, anyone can do it. And you have other prisoners in other places. Thon was very still. So here's what I'm proposing, Mara continued. The Dominion agrees to a formal Integration Council medical review of Soreth's case. Not just his health, his legal status. The basis for his detention. The treaty provision you're using to hold him. She let that land. In exchange, I agree not to issue any public statement about this filing or these negotiations for 60 days. 60 days for the review to proceed quietly. 60 days for the Council to look at this correctly. And if the review finds the detention lawful? Thon asked. Then it finds it lawful and you take him. With a medical team present and a proper facility confirmed in writing. And you still have the precedent problem, but you have it in your favor. She looked at him steadily. But we both know what the review is going to find. The silence stretched. In the gully, Soreth had not moved. But his eyes were open, fixed on the negotiation above him, and Mara could feel, she could not explain how, but she could feel, the weight of his attention. Thon looked at her for a long time. You are 61 years old, he said. You are a retired animal surgeon. You have no political standing, no galactic credentials, no institutional authority. No, she agreed. How, he said, and the question seemed genuine. Did you do this? She thought about Bernard. She thought about 40 years of being the person who showed up when things were bad. She thought about the look in Soreth's eyes that first night, that ancient, exhausted surrender, and what it had cost him to eat from her hand anyway. I just kept going, she said. That's the only answer I have. I just didn't stop. The agreement was signed at 1930 hours. Mara did not sleep that night. She sat at the creek bank while the bureau team packed their lighting rigs and the Keth ship sat dark and silent in her north field and the stars above Nebraska were momentarily clear between clouds. She sat and she watched Soreth breathe, steadier now, the infection already slightly reduced by the antibiotics she had adapted from her veterinary kit under Hess's quietly impressed observation. At some point deep in the night, Soreth spoke. The translator relay was still active on the bank beside her. It rendered his words slowly, as if the language was running deeper than the relay's calibration. My command abandoned me, he said. My people convicted me. The Keth put a chain on me and then forgot me. I was becoming used to being forgotten. I know, she said. I do not understand what you are. I do not understand why you act this way. The records we have of humans suggest a violent and fractured species. We are, she said. We're also this. What is this? She looked up at the stars. The part that can't look away. A long pause. In Vishari culture, he said, when a warrior is saved from chains, there is a debt. Not financial. Not political. A debt of witness. The one who removed the chain becomes bonded to the history of the one who wore it. Their stories become connected. You don't owe me anything, she said. I know, he said. That is not what I am saying. She looked at him. I'm saying your story is in my story now. Whatever happens, whatever the review finds, that cannot be removed. A human woman sat in the rain and refused to look away. That is permanent. She was quiet for a moment. What happens if the review clears you? She asked. If they find the conviction wrong? Then I return to the Vishari sovereign fleet. They will have me. And if they won't? The relay hummed for a long time with something that it could not fully translate. Something that carried frequency and resonance and weight. Then I will have to decide who I am without that, he said finally. As you have had to decide. She looked at him. He looked at her. In the dark, in Nebraska, with the stars above and the creek below and 72 hours of paperwork behind them and an uncertain galaxy ahead, two beings who had both lost things they could not recover sat together and understood each other completely without needing the same language to do it. The Integration Council Medical and Legal Review of Custody Case ICB 7714, formally titled, with the elegant bureaucratic understatement of galactic governance, Re. Contested status of designated prisoner Soreth, Vishari Sovereign Fleet, Ret. Concluded 31 days after Mara Voss filed her paperwork in a Nebraska Creek gully at 3:47 in the morning. The findings were 47 pages long. Mara read every word. The review found the Keth Dominion's claim of prisoner of war status legally invalid on 3 separate grounds. It found the treaty provision they had invoked, Article 14, subsection 9 of the Keth-Vashari Armistice Framework, had been applied in a manner inconsistent with its stated scope and had never been validated by Integration Council oversight as required by the Armistice's own ratification clause. It found that Soratha's court-martial conviction by the Vashari Sovereign Command had been conducted without adequate independent review of the communications blackout evidence, and formally requested that the Vashari judiciary reopen the case under Council observer supervision. It found, in a section labeled Environmental and Physical Conditions of Detention, that the subject had been held in conditions constituting cruel and unusual treatment under Integration Council Humanitarian Code, Article 7. The language of that section was drawn directly, almost word for word, from the medical evaluation report that Mara had filed with her professional credentials attached. Her words were in the official record of the Integration Council. She read that section 3 times. Sorath was released from Dominion custody 11 days after the review concluded, pending the outcome of the Vashari judicial review, which took another 40 days and ended with his conviction overturned on a unanimous finding that the communications blackout had constituted force majeure, negating the dereliction charge. He was formally reinstated to the Vashari Sovereign Fleet with full back honors. He turned the reinstatement down. Mara learned about this on a Tuesday in April, when Daniel called her from the bureau office sounding like a man who had just experienced something he did not have language for. "He's here," Daniel said. "Who is?" "Sorath. He's at the bureau field office. He's asking for you." She was in her barn at the time, cleaning equipment. She set down what she was holding and was quiet for a moment. "Tell him I'll be there in an hour," she said. "Mom." He brought people. A Vashari delegation. 6 of them full formal dress. "There's a Vashari diplomatic vessel in the bureau parking lot." She was quiet a little longer. "An hour," she repeated. "I need to change my boots." The bureau conference room had never been designed for beings of Soratha's size, and the accommodation was imperfect. He occupied one end of the room in the way that mountains occupy landscapes, massively, inevitably, as if the space had always been arranged around him. He had put on weight. His scales had recovered their color, a deep slate blue-green that caught the fluorescent light differently depending on how he moved. His wing membranes had healed, though she could still see the lines where she had closed the tears. His eyes, when they found her across the room, were the same amber ringed with gold. He spoke first, and the room's integrated translator rendered it with the particular care of a system that had been specifically calibrated, she suspected, for this conversation. "You look less wet than I remember." She laughed. It surprised her, a real laugh, sudden and genuine. "You look better than I remember. Your medicine is adequate." High praise. He introduced the delegation. 2 were Vashari fleet representatives, present to formally acknowledge the overturned conviction. 2 were Integration Council observers, there to complete the case file. The 5th was a Vashari legal scholar who had, Sorath explained, spent the last month building the argument that successfully voided the Keth detention claim. The 6th was smaller than the others and stood slightly behind Sorath. When Mara looked at her, the translator identified the pronoun. Sorath said, "My daughter. She asked to come. I hope that is acceptable." "Of course," Mara said. The young Vashari looked at Mara with eyes that were her father's eyes, the same amber, the same gold, and said carefully in English she had clearly been practicing, "Thank you for not looking away." Mara stood very still for a moment. "That's the only way I know how to be," she said. There were formal things after that. Statements signed and acknowledged. The council observers completed their file. The fleet representatives delivered a written record of Soratha's reinstatement offer and his declination, which was itself a formal document. The Vashari, it turned out, made formal documents of significant decisions, preserving them in what Sorath translated as the Registry of Witness Choices. His declination letter stated that he intended to take a period of what the translation rendered as considered distance from military service. He did not specify how long. When the formal portion was concluded and the room had thinned, Sorath remained. Mara remained. Daniel hovered in the doorway for a moment and then, reading the situation with the instinct of a son who understood his mother, quietly left. "I have a request," Sorath said. "Tell me." "I would like to return to your property." "To the creek." He paused. "Not permanently. I have obligations and a path to determine. But I would like to return to the place where I was unchained. There is a Vashari practice. When something significant has ended, The place is returned to with intention, so that the ending is fully witnessed and closed. She considered this. Is it like a goodbye? More like an acknowledgement. A way of saying, this happened here. It is real. It cannot be undwelled. You're welcome on my property any time, she said. There is one more thing. She waited. The Vishari delegation has brought a formal gift. It is not material. We do not give objects for this kind of debt. He paused. We give names. She tilted her head. In the Vishari registry of witness choices, you will be recorded as the one who sat in the rain. It is not a translation exactly. It carries more weight in Vishari. It means, she who chose witness over convenience and refused to be moved by indifference. The fluorescent light hummed. Outside the bureau windows, April was happening, green and muddy and ordinary in Nebraska. Mara thought about Bernard, who had always said that the only thing worth measuring at the end of a life was whether you had shown up for the right things at the right time. She thought about the smell of rain on creek mud and a creature's amber eyes and the particular kind of loneliness that comes from being forgotten by everyone who was supposed to remember you. She thought about a young Vishari practicing English so she could say thank you for not looking away. Thank you, Mara said. I'll carry that. In May, a piece in the Integration Council's Public Affairs Digest, the closest thing the galactic community had to a newspaper, ran a brief summary of case ICB 7714. It was picked up by 17 different species news networks. It was discussed in Integration Council chambers as an example of what private citizens could accomplish within the existing legal framework if they understood its mechanisms. The Keth Dominion issued a formal statement calling the case an anomaly. The Integration Council's Humanitarian Oversight Division announced the formation of a new review panel for prisoner treatment cases. 3 other citizens, 2 on Earth, 1 on a colony world called Marin's Hope, filed contested custody reviews in the months following Soratha's case. All 3 referenced ICB 7714 in their filings. All 3 were represented, pro bono, by a young bureau lawyer named Prakash who had recently requested a transfer to the Humanitarian Division. Sorath returned to the creek in June. He came alone in the early morning before the day had fully warmed. Mara was already there. She had started taking her coffee by the creek in the mornings, not because she was waiting exactly, but because the habit had formed itself out of something she didn't fully examine. He stood at the creek bank for a long time, looking at the post where the chain had been driven. The chain was gone, confiscated as evidence, then formally decommissioned by the Integration Council. The post was still there. She had left it on purpose. She wasn't certain why. It looked smaller than I remembered, he said. Things usually do, she said, once they can't hurt you anymore. He was quiet. The creek ran low and clear and fast. The morning birds were doing what morning birds do in Nebraska in June, which is to say everything at once and all of it urgently. I have decided, Sorath said, to petition the Integration Council for an observer position on the Humanitarian Review Panel. It will require a period of study and a formal application process. Pause. I will be residing on Earth during that period. She looked at him. Nebraska? She asked. Your property if you are willing. There is the gully. I have been told the winter wheat in the north field has recovered. She thought about this for approximately 3 seconds. The barn's big enough, she said. The north field's yours. No chain. Obviously, he said, with something that the translator rendered as dry but which she recognized, across all the distance of species and stars, as warmth. She raised her coffee cup. He inclined his great head. The creek ran between them, clear and fast, carrying everything downstream the way creeks always do. Not erasing it, just moving it forward, the way all things eventually move forward when someone chooses not to look away. They chained a starving dragon for 90 days, then a human family changed the galaxy forever. Thank you for watching DracoWar. If this story moved you, drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from and what part hit hardest. Every story on this channel is written for you. Like, subscribe, share with someone who still believes one person can make a difference. Because they can. This story just proved it.